Grand Dawning, Great Rising, Cleveland. Good afternoon, good evening, good night to you, depending on where you are on the planet. Welcome to another edition of 360 Info Network. I'm Vince Robinson. I am awaiting the entry of our co-host, Antonio, and we're also expecting another guest. As a matter of fact, we have two guests today with the same last name, but they're not related, and the last name is Imhotep. So once we get some wrinkles ironed out with respect to domain names and so forth and so on, we'll get them in our studio and we can have the conversation that we are intended to have. Our first guest will be Asar Imhotep, and our second guest is Michael Imhotep, who is a Detroiter. He is the founder of the African History Network, and he's doing some very interesting classes that we will make you privy to as we continue with our program. And that most likely will be in the second hour, but perhaps it may be sooner than that. We'll see what happens with that. Just want to take this opportunity to, in advance, say Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. You know, Mother's Day is really a day that we should celebrate every day, but May 12th, 2024 will be the day that we officially observe that celebration. So whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you are, honor your mother tomorrow, because without mom, you would not be here. That is a definite truth and a definite reality. Just wanted to make a few announcements as we await the arrival of our guests and our co-host. There are some grant opportunities that I want to make everyone aware of. We have some grant opportunities that are coming to us by virtue of the Assembly for the Arts. The Creative Impact Fund is going to award $10,000 unrestricted grants to artists in Cuyahoga County. So you might want to take advantage of that. Go to assemblycle.org and you will be able to obtain an application for that, fill it out, do what you can, go get that money, because I know a lot of you out there are deserving of those funds, and I'm sure you will put them to good use. There are some other grant opportunities on that website as well, but this is one that you want to take advantage of because I think the grant period goes through, or the application period goes through May 31st, and then after that, you'll have to wait for the next round. We have been joined by Brother Antonio. My brother, how you feeling this morning?
I'm doing okay. Y'all hear me okay?
Yeah, we hear you okay, and we see you okay, and we're going to do what we can to get Brother Asar in here. I sent him a couple of emails, and I know that he's having an issue with his domain name, which is causing him to have to spell his name differently. And as we say that, here he is. Looks like he may be in Philadelphia. He may be on some other part of the planet where it's warm enough to be outside like that. But we shall see. Welcome to 360 Info Network, Brother Asar.
Peace and blessings, peace and blessings. Thank you for having me again, and sorry for the delay. Had a little bit of technical difficulties, so instead of being on my laptop, I'm on the phone. So
yeah, that's what I thought that. Yeah, okay.
Yes.
I thought I was gonna have to go on the phone myself because my computer was acting up. We're not in no retrograde or nothing, are we?
Well, actually, we're in the shadow of a Mercury retrograde that ended a couple of weeks ago, but what some astrologers are saying is that we still feel the effect. So we'll blame it on that today, if nothing else. So, Brother Asar, I guess that Mercury retrograde is affecting your domain name.
well, this has been an issue for a couple of months now. So unless that retrograde has lasted about 4 or 5 months, then it may have been some other retrograde. I don't know. I don't keep up with it, but it's just an issue of my domain name. I originally purchased through this old web service because I do web development and graphic design, and it was a company that I used way back in the day, and I still had my domain because you got to renew it every year. So it was purchased through them, but so 15 years later, they got bought out by GoDaddy, and my domain um, renews itself. So they just take the money out my account, and I don't have to worry about it. And but since they were bought out, my domain name expired, and the new company GoDaddy has my domain, and they're trying to make me bid for my domain name. So I
Yeah.
just said, I'll just change my domain name. So now it's osirimhotep.com, and I'll just wait some time until it expires from there, and I could purchase my domain. But
Okay.
uh, so that's the issue. So same website. Luckily, I have my website hosted on my what the company I use for hosting domains is HostGator.com, along with my other websites and things. So I just had the domain with the other one, and so it was nothing just to purchase a new domain and have it point to my old folder. So everything is cool, right and exact. So
Okay.
y'all see Osir Imhotep, and you get a friend request or something like that from me. That's me.
Oh,
Right.
okay. All right.
So, okay.
Well, my good brother, I decided to bring you on to see what was new going on in your life. I think we talked about a book release last time, or something too, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yes, it may have been that long
Yeah.
because the last book that I came out with was I think of August of last year,
Mhm.
and that was Race and Identity in Ancient Egypt, Volume One. So right now I'm I'm organizing a book that I'm editing, but I am kind of focused right now on translating into English this 600 some odd, I think it's about 630 pages uh, of a text by Jean Claude Mboli, um, translated as The Origin of African Languages. And this was originally published in 2010, 2011. And so he has just released a second book, which is a continuation of that book. And so, where he's kind of focused on the relationship between African languages and Indo European and Semitic languages, as well as a theory for vocalizing the ancient Egyptian language. So, my book is ordered, it is, on its way. So, I may have some updates for that. So I think somebody else is in the works of translating that into English, his
Hmm.
new text. So he commissioned me to translate the older text into English. So getting my translation practice on with this text originally written in French.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. But see, that's you know that's one of the reasons too that I like bringing you on because you kind of add to the fire and the repertoire that I, from my understanding about trying to get to the bottom of a lot of confusion that we seem like we're going through about who was the Egyptians, and even when you get into spirituality and religion and stuff like that. I always felt that language was the key, or linguistics, and the etymology of words was the key to kind of zeroing in on on some truths. And we talked about in the past how important language is, and how in identifying the person on how they see things, and from their viewpoint and things like that. And it's I think it's something that our listeners need to really pay close attention to, because I think it can solve a lot of the issues that we have. And I was told by my brother that, you know I don't know how recent it was, but you was on Sarnetta. Is that correct?
I don't know how recent that was,
Yeah,
but
um, it was
because I
it
haven't
was
been on in a while.
yeah,
But go ahead.
okay.
I'm sorry.
Well, it might be an older conversation that you were having about some of the guys that come on Sarnetta, and I think he was saying basically he was feeling that they was lacking some of the research that was necessary for them to be out there and, on that particular platform, uh, producing certain information, So I think that you said that you was challenging, they're sourcing up on some of the characters there. They're sourcing up on, some of the information.
Yeah, it's more so, and I've said this before. It's that we have to realize as African people here in America and just globally that there is a systematic and organized war against the rise of African people on all levels of reality. And we have to take our personal lives seriously and the lives of our fellow man and the culture and the community in general very seriously as well. And we just can't come out and just throw information out there without doing our own due diligence. Because as I stated before, if you are a teacher of some kind, you have to consider yourself like a general in the military, right? These are the individuals who make plans for and develop strategies and the like for war. And in order for them to develop worthwhile strategies, they have to have reliable intel. And you got to understand that they are ranked above a number of different troops who are going to be out in the battlefield. And so the wrong information, misleading information, can send them into a situation where they will get ambushed and it can redirect the course of the war. And so I try to put this analogy in the minds of people so they could take seriously. If I'm giving you this information, I'm intending for it to impact your life in a certain way, to strengthen your relationship, for example, with your children, with your spouse, right? To gather money, right? To develop your household, put your family in a position to where they can have generational wealth or at least generational income, right? Education and like all of these different things, it's just not information for information's sake. It is to help us to develop into the kinds of people and the kind of community that when tragedy comes our way, we are able to respond appropriately because we have the systems in place as well as the knowledge of history, ourselves, and the world. And so when I have those types of discussions with individuals, no matter if it's, they may think it's small in terms of religion and the like, or even if the ancient Egyptians were black, is not haphazard. It is with purpose and intent, and and everything that we discuss is applicable in some way to your life, even if it's not immediate. I on one hand, I say we need to consider ourselves, those of us who consider ourselves researchers and teachers, like generals in the military. But at the same time, I also use another analogy that we are indeed farmers, and the community is the soil, is the plot. And what we're doing is depositing seeds. And you may do the necessary toil to plant the seeds, but it's the circumstances of the environment that is going to determine if that particular seed grows. Now, we can do what we can to better the probability that seed will grow, and produce fruit or whatnot. Um, but ultimately, you're planting the seed, not expecting for it to instantly, grow into something,
Okay.
but to understand that over time, when these elements come, that seed will, if put into the right environment, that seed will sprout. And so even though you're giving information, it may not at the moment be relevant to the person in their life, but you know when the rains start coming and the like, and it's time for growing season, that seed is already planted, and they'll be like, I remember that discussion
Mhm.
that so and so had, and let me go look into here because this is now applicable to me, in this moment. Right? Let me go review that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, you know what that kind of reminds me of? Look like we even said we're getting a little echo. Bear with us, y'all. I don't know. I try to turn this thing down. Um, but it kind of reminds me of a parent and a child relationship. You know, when you try to instill so much into your children, you hope they're taking it in, and then they get that aha moment, later on in life, of some of those seeds that you tried to plant in them. But would you say that relationship is the same, like with what we've been talking about lately on the show about some of the things that's going on over on the continent? I just seen a couple pieces with PLO Lumumba and Sister Arikana, praising and talking about, Bikini Faso and them supporting Bikini Faso. So I was wanting to know your take on that. Look like we might have lost Brother Saw
Yeah,
for a second.
we did lose him. He is coming back in, so you have to restate your question.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. All right. Oh, you there, brother?
Yeah, he's there.
I'm here. I
Okay,
apologize.
I
I'm
can
sorry.
hear.
I'm on
Okay.
mute to try to
Yeah.
reduce the echo.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I was saying something about when we talked about planting that seed and something that we need to understand because a lot of things is about timing. You know, it was. I remember when Dick Gregory was on the show, and I spoke about timing. And all our past leaders, they didn't get to see some of their ideology, come to fruition, or some of the things but their purpose in that particular time could have been just to keep the torch lit until the appropriate time. So looking at that and looking at Africa and in actuality, African Americans used, people like Garvey and a few other folks actually used to look, at Booker T and certain places like that to inspire, certain people like that to inspire them in doing what they did. So going back and looking at the continent with Mali and Niger and Burkina Faso, and seem like this, we get some groundswell going on there. Would you say that's kind of the timing and that relationship that you spoke of about planting that seed? Is it the time right now?
You know, and I think it was Martin Luther King Jr. who said something to the nature of, the time is always now for justice, right? Um, but unfortunately, when you're dealing with a population of people, you know, no matter how cohesive the culture is, every single individual is a byproduct of the environment, the age, and their upbringing in conjunction with their own intellectual abilities and capacities. And when you have a large population that you're trying to get to move in a certain direction, it is very difficult to try to appeal to everyone, um, given the different ages, given the different capacities and willingness to learn and do, um, the quality of the information, and just the issues that are going on in terms of the people, in terms of power relations with others in the life. So, you know, sometimes we got to look at it probably not so much as, you know, or at least on one instance, like we're planting a seed. But in other instances, we can look at it more so like a relay race. So as you said, to keep the torch lit, that somebody is, or some group is doing the first leg of the run,
Okay.
and then they're passing it on to the next
Mm-hmm.
group, and they
Right.
take it off from there,
Mm-hmm.
right? You know, timing, preparation, you know, all that comes into play. And so sometimes we got to understand that everything isn't instant, because the ideas has to permeate throughout the population, and there's so many variables involved that uh, that that can hinder or alter the trajectory of these things, especially when you have an enemy, an open enemy that is hell bent, that wakes up every morning with a large amount of resources dedicated to ensuring that
Mm-hmm.
your rise does not happen.
Mm-hmm.
Because in order for them to be them and for them to be great, you can't be great also. In their mind, it's an inverse relationship. So your rise in their mind equals their demise. So we got to do what we have to do to ensure that you don't have a working economy, that your families, you know, are not stable, that your education is subpar, et cetera, et cetera. And this is the stuff that we're fighting. So, you know, that in of itself produces many of the outcomes that we're trying to fight in the minds of the people we're trying to save. So it's just very complicated, and you know, time is of the essence, but we can't waste too much time, because you can miss opportunities that, when that opportunity is missed, it will uh, put you in a state of being a permanent underclass, and that's what we're trying to avoid.
And yeah, that is so true. And this is something that I really want to drive home. And you know, we had a couple guests on, and you know, we mentioned it, and I just feel the necessity to reiterate that what you just said, that you know, one person's rise, you know, is construed as another person's fall and things like that. So let's, when we see this, because of what just took place over in Africa, which is historical for number one. And so when we see some of the things may futuristically may come about because of this change and this move, and like you stated, it's threatening to a group of people. It's threatening through the whole pretty much northern hemisphere, you know, this move, because you taking, they feel that you taking food out of their particular mouth. So when you see some of the things that may transpire in the coming years or months, we need to recognize. I'm talking to my family here out here. You need to recognize what is taking place, because we should know by now that these folks is not going to sit on the sideline and let you get rid of their rental property, because that's how it was. You know, uh, those particular French countries was like rental property to France. You know, you know, their economy flourished and bloomed because they kept their foot on those countries' neck. So the question is, when you see what has historically taken place over history, you know, about how them trying to undermine the government, trying to go in with their jackals and things of that nature and charge and start to try to cause confusion. My point is, we need to recognize it when we see it, and not just look at, oh, they just can't get it together. You see, they took over militarily and this, that, and other this, and then just dismiss it, you know. But we need to understand and recognize when they show their hand, because you know they're coming at them already. So you're on mute.
Muted, Asar.
Yes, sir.
My bad.
Mhm.
Yes, indeed. And what I was saying is that it's a situation where we have to Like I was thinking of, like, in every African community, there needs to be a group of people that come together, and their only job is to see in what ways can somebody come and hurt our community. Like that's their job. And their job outside of that is to, in terms of discovering in what ways can other communities come in and disrupt the stability, is to think of strategies to be able to counter that. Because what we lack in many instances, whether it's on the continent or whether it's here in the United States, is systems. And this seems to be kind of the number one thing. Like, many African people still have this, and this is before Christianity, this is before Islam. That is just kind of an outgrowth of an ancient world mindset, that it's going to be this chosen person that's going to come from the heavens, that's going to be prophesied, that's going to come and rescue us, right? And or we find these people who have these great ideas and create these organizations. They have great personalities. They can rally the folks, but as soon as they're gone, the movement is gone because we don't have systems in place, right? And this is what we need. Like, every single time I see a coup in Africa, the first thing I ask is what's the system? What system are you going to put in place? Sure, you can argue that whoever's in power isn't doing enough, but it should never be about the person in power. It should be about the system in place. So if you don't have a system that is better than what is in place now, that person should not get any support. Because, what if you get assassinated? What if, because we know the game plan. This is just a fact of history. So, if somebody comes rise, they're going to come after you. So when, you know, in the military sense, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And so you have these strategies and protocols in place for when something happens. So when you get assassinated, what's going to be the backup plan? Right? Who's your successor? Or are you training everybody to be leaders in the community? Do you have the checks and balances in place? Do you have scientists? Is everybody just a military leader? Can you pull moisture out of the air and provide clean drinking water for your people? Right? Like, so these are the kinds of things that I'm looking at, because everybody has these grand ideas. And of course, in Africa, the number one strategy is to gather some military folks and let's just take over the government. But I never hear about the systems that's going to be in place, because as soon as somebody gets tired of you, then you getting forced out. Right? It got to be about the system. This is why, for better or for worse, you got to respect the United States and how it's set up. For example, like the military has no allegiance to the president, but to the Constitution. Right? And so in Africa, you have people who are aligned with leaders instead of the system that is put in place. Like, they take an oath to the person, but not the system. And that's why, the military doesn't care who's in office. Whoever it is, there's a system in place. He just can't do an order and do all this kind of stuff, and they're going to follow suit. Now, there was a new movie that's been released called Civil War. I don't know if y'all had an opportunity to see it.
No.
Now, they don't get into details on what caused the Civil War, but it seeing it, and it's very graphic. So, if you bring in your children, I would advise you have a conversation, depending on their age. But it's very graphic. But it puts into your mind, if a civil war was to pop off right now in the United States, where are black folks in this?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know about supply chains? How will you get water and food to your people? How will you be able to make weapons? Because when the pandemic came around, and when Barack Obama was elected into office, Europeans started buying a lot of guns. And when African Americans wanted to go get their guns, you had these places that were refusing to sell black people guns. And they can do that because you don't have companies that we own that makes weapons that can sell to our people with no problem.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the kind of stuff. This is why certain stuff hasn't happened, because we're not ready. But the seeds have been planted by our great ones and elders, and it's just a matter of my generation taking the torch and running and doing what we can, putting the plans, positioning the following generations to take the torch and run the next leg. But there has to be a plan in place. There has to be a system, and that's what I'm looking for in Africa. Because if it doesn't end up in a United States of Africa, I don't know what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Because the issue in Congo could be quelled. So it would be equivalent to, like, if a militia in Texas starts attacking some folks in Fort Worth. The United States of America has the troops that will come in and quell this insurrection. But because it's individual states with these minor militias fighting each other, over the Rwanda Congo borders, this is why nothing can be done. But if that, rogue group out of Rwanda had to fight Nigeria, had to fight Cote d'Ivoire, had to fight South Africa, had to fight Mozambique, had to fight Mali and Chad, they'll think twice about coming in and trying to invade, other sovereign nations and the like. And this is the way we got to think. But I'm sorry.
Yeah. Just quickly to add to that, that's why I kind of respect the piece of them being smart and aligning themselves up militarily with the rest of those other three countries. So they say, hey, you mess with one, you messing with all of us. So that kind of may slow their roll a little bit, and I admire them for doing that. And like I say again, it's just a matter if it ignites and take over with some of the other French-speaking countries and things like that, and they get the support of the elders that can offer direction, for them young brothers, and some of the young brothers and sisters that are in power. And then we got the whole Senegal piece with the young Pan-Africanism leaders over there. So it's just warrant watching and seeing what moves. And I would hope through history and through historical data that Africa should be wise enough to know that folks are coming for you, and hopefully put some mechanisms in place to avoid some of those issues. Brother Vince, I know you're biting the bit, sitting on the sideline. What's good?
Well, yeah, there are so many things that he talked about that I would like to unpack, but I don't think we have the time. I do want to reiterate that you are listening to 360 Info Network right here on AM 1490 WERE. Our guest is Asar Imhotep. He is an Africana researcher. He is a cultural theorist. He is a software developer. And, when Asar is on, I'm in student mode. I'm just taking notes and putting my thinking cap on, putting myself in a position to learn. I also wanted to mention at the top of the hour, we will be joined by Michael Imhotep, who is no relation to Asar Imhotep that we know of. Michael is from Detroit. Asar, are you from Detroit too? Okay,
No,
he's
no,
not from Detroit.
I'm originally from Texas, but
Oh, Texas.
I'm
That's
a
right.
quasi Philly native now. So
He's a Texan. Okay. Um, a couple of other things. Just want to make sure that you know that we are live on YouTube and Facebook, and we like to encourage you to go to our YouTube channels and subscribe, like, comment, do all those things, hit the notification bell. My YouTube channel is Vince Robinson. Hamtonio's is The Journey with Hamtonio. You can go to his YouTube channel and you can actually view this program, and you can also see us on Facebook on the 360 Info Network Facebook page and my Facebook page. So you got a whole lot of options if you want to get the Afrocentric content that we bring your way each and every Saturday. Brother Asar, we have talked about what's going on in Niger and Burkina Faso, and most recently what happened in Senegal, which I don't think was a military takeover. I think there was just an agreement that they would allow democracy to take place and they would elect their leader. But what concerns me is just the anatomy of a coup, because many times you basically have other superpowers that are manipulating the military to put someone in place to quote unquote control the government, but that doesn't necessarily reflect the will of the people. When we look at what happened in Senegal, perhaps that does reflect the will of the people, but the whole idea of a military takeover sometimes it's just a smokescreen for the control that's being exerted by an outside force. And I'm just wondering, what direction the continent can go in when people realize that it's important to have those takeovers to arrest the control of the colonialist power and to restore it to the people, but enable the people to have a role or a say in who ultimately runs the country.
indeed, and I don't want to act like I have all the answers, but one answer that I can put forth is the prevalence of Afrocentricity as an underlying paradigm for all African countries and people. Because what ends up happening is that African people, by force or whatnot, have taken on the ideologies and ideas of foreign people, believing on some level that they are better than their own. And it is only through a shifting of paradigm where the African people are saying, nope, we're going to look for African solutions to all of our problems and issues. And if it violates our African principles, we're not adopting, right? And so the foreigners have an advantage over Africans in general, in the sense that most Africans now are either Christians or Muslims. And so as long as the deep rooted spirituality, morality, and ethics is grounded in a foreign colonial religion, then it is easy for someone to come and penetrate into the minds of people who they want to be sympathetic to them and put them in power. And so if they were Afrocentric in terms of their orientation, it would provide them a critical analysis capacity and logic that it would be easier to detect when these foreign powers and the like are trying to infiltrate for their own particular reason, because it's going to send a red flag.
Mm-hmm.
And so if, for example, if everything is community based, and somebody's coming in and trying to privatize water, well, that goes against our African principles that water should be shared with everyone,
Mm-hmm.
and that you can't, and so what about the animals and things that we rely on, here? It's an ecosystem. So, like this is what the kinds of things that we have to have in place. And so if we have a system to where, it doesn't have to be a party system like in the United States, but there's a reason why they have three branches of government. Like I encourage, like once you get knowledge yourself, you feel comfortable in who you are, you're black and you're proud, go back and start seriously studying European history. You'll get to understand from the Proto-Indo-Europeans, the nomadic herders, to the Proto-Germanics, to the rise of Greece, Rome, Spain, Italy, the wars between the the Anglo-Saxons and the Celtic folks, their religions, their political systems, and what they were fighting all this time.
Mm-hmm.
So if you understand, for example, the Spartans and Sparta in ancient Greece, this was a warrior society that they weren't very bright in terms of knowledge. They weren't philosophers and the like, but they were warrior people. Now, they would enslave, they had slaves. So when you see the movie 300 and they're talking about that, we're not going to be slaves and all of that, they had slaves, and they, and these were European folks. These weren't African folks who were slaves. These are other, what we would in today's time call white people, right? And these individuals had a certain group of the Spartans that would, their job was to harass and kill and keep their foot on their necks of the slave population. So you get random raids, random killings, and the like. When you understand this governing system that they had, you can understand modern day police brutality and the way that they're always constantly harassing and doing these random checks and all this. This is stuff that goes back to the time of Sparta. So when you understand that history, you can start to create strategies of resistance. And I wish, even though this is kind of a sidebar, I wish that African people would stop worrying about why Europeans don't like them. What did we do? Who cares? Develop power. So no matter how they feel about you, you know how to respond appropriately when they violate your personal space, right? But saying all that to say, it's again, it's always going to boil down to systems. But this is why the history is so important. Study white folks, and if you study the ways in which they fought each other, to the extent in which they would create devices to torture and kill each other, the ways that they would use to infiltrate and disrupt governments, you understand why you being faithful to your wife is an issue of national security. Why having a wife that is not impressed with material things? Because if I need to take down you and get at you, I'm gonna go through your wife. I'm gonna build a relationship with her, and I'm gonna flash some money in front of her. And men ain't off the hook, because if you don't have phallus discipline, I can send any old sister with a nice shape in a red dress and mess up your whole thing. You got to look at your personal relationships and your marriage and your family as as a small kingdom. And I apologize for the plane if you can hear it. Well, I don't apologize for the plane, but you know what I'm saying. If you can't hear it. Like all of this is important, and why we need to have these conversations, and we need to make sure that we're tight, because these are the strategies that they use to disrupt individuals. How many people, you know, uh, how many kings, literally and figuratively, have failed because they didn't have phallus discipline? They're all over the place trying to sleep with any and every woman, and then now somehow the woman finds out, divorce, issues with kids. Now you spending more money trying to pay lawyers, having to deal with child support and all this other kind of stuff. Y'all got two separate places now. This is one of the ways in which we reduce the income, because if you ain't got income, you ain't got a stable family, you can't fight.
Yeah,
Like all of this becomes important. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, you're right. It reminds me of the African proverb. What it say? The ruin of a nation begins in the homes of its people. And they know that strategy, and that's something that I put out there all the time to some of my friends and female friends, is that, you know, what you said has to be recognized, you know, by us as a people, that they you know, that's that whole separation piece. If they can't come after me, they coming after you, and they're gonna put all the shiny objects in front of you in order to get, you know, to divide that whole situation, and that's been a tactic that's been using in these Americas for a long time.
Brother
Exactly,
Asar,
and that works with your people as well. So if it seems like these group over here has more than this group, this fosters jealousy over here, and these people are more likely to plot against them, and now you have divide in the community, which is why it's important to make sure that everybody's needs are met, but they also have a value system that respects that, you know, there's fluctuations in societies, and if I'm driving a Mercedes Benz but you're driving a Chevy Tahoe, that doesn't mean we're unequal. We both have vehicles. We both can get to the place where we need to go, right? But if I'm driving a Mercedes Benz and you're walking, and I'm doing whatever I can to prevent you from getting a vehicle, regardless to how it is, this is what causes, um, you know, jealousy and things of this nature, and people will plot against you. So like all of this comes into play, and why really uh, every leader in the community needs to have a working knowledge of human psychology. Of course, we gotta, you know, study our African Black psychology, but human psychology nonetheless. Which is why, like, the most brilliant person that I've never met, but I wish I could have when he was alive, was Dr. Amos Wilson. Like he's my number. Like he, like when I read his stuff, it's just like,
Man,
why, man? Like how you link this stuff together in this way. And but I'll end there. I'm sorry.
and
I wanted to get back to the religion that. Okay, go ahead.
And I was going to quote him when he's saying that, when we talked about the people. He states, change the way you talking about, getting worried about white folks liking us and things of that nature. He said, change the way you are, and they have no choice but to change, because you change. So, and that's simple. Since if you keep going on and being the way you are, and how in your relationship to him, his systems and whatever, it's going to still impose what it is to impose. So change the way you are, and he has no choice but to change.
One of the things that you suggested was religion. You talked about Christianity and you talked about Islam, and we can both agree that those are religions that were basically birthed on the continent of Africa, but were appropriated by Europeans and given to us and altered our relationship with our spiritual aspect. And I'm just curious, and I know you don't have all the answers, but I'm sure you've probably given some thought to this at some point. What will it take for us to return to our relationship with the spirit world and discontinue the damage that has been caused by our embracing European versions of African religions?
As I stated earlier, Afrocentricity, adopting Afrocentricity as a paradigm, as a living and working paradigm, because again, it's going to give you the strategies and the logic to be able to question the value of other social systems in comparison to your own. And the reason why I bring up Christianity and Islam is because they are the two top most proselytizing religions out there. And this is built into the system itself to where in order for it to thrive, it cannot coexist with any other system, which is why everywhere they go, they destroy the native system. So they make it to where your culture, your ancestors, your language, your way of dress, your artwork, your pedagogy, meaning the way that you teach and educate children, all of that is by default not valuable, and it must be gotten rid of and replaced with these particular the Abrahamic systems. And so the and so this prevents you from seeing value in your own self. And as long as you don't see value in yourself, in your culture, in your ancestors, you will always be looking to others to solve your problems. And that's ultimately what they want. They want you to be dependent upon them. So you have to learn how to value yourself. And the only way that you're going to do that is if you have an Afrocentric mindset to where you center your African self, your African languages, your African family, your African deities, your history. As long as somebody else is dictating how you should perceive life, we'll never be able to achieve the goals and the vision that our ancestors had for us.
Brother Asar, we have just a few moments before we go over to our virtual version of the broadcast. And I understood that you had about an hour to spend with us today. We have on deck Brother Michael Imhotep, your cousin from Detroit. So we're going to have a conversation with him. But I think you mentioned that you have a new book or something that you need to let the folks know about. So I want to make sure that folks have a way of contacting you, connecting with you, and taking advantage of the brilliance that you bring to us.
I do appreciate it. Thank you. Yes. As mentioned earlier, the latest text is the first in a 3-volume series titled Race and Identity in Ancient Egypt, Volume 1. And we're dealing with the meaning of Kemet in the first volume. The second volume is going to deal with the actual issues of race, color, proof, and the like. Peace to our good brother, Michael Imhotep, who I see there. And the third volume is just going to be a reference material text. So it's just going to all the text that's dealing with color and the like, from the Greek to the Arabic to the early English and of course the ancient Egyptian. It's just going to be there, so you can see the raw hieroglyphs, transliteration, and translation. So those are the ongoing. But the first volume is out, and you can go to Osir Imhotep. That's OSIRIMHOTEP.com and get the work there. So I do appreciate, again, y'all having me, and can't wait till next time.
Okay. And I'm actually looking forward to possibly at some point having a dual conversation with the Imhotep brothers, because both of y'all bring it. There's so much that we can learn from both. And I know that Michael Imhotep is immersed in African history. I mean, he's got his own channel that's dedicated to African history. And I know you as well. We've been so blessed to be able to take in what you can provide for us. So thanks for joining us today, brother.
What's up? Hey, Asar, how you doing, brother?
I'm doing well.
That's
You look
good.
good. So
Oh,
hope
thanks.
you
You
as well
too.
as well.
I
All
take it you all know of each other.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
I've been on this
been on my
program
show.
before.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we were
Okay.
at the
And I got
Hockey
to,
conference. We were at the
I got to
Hockey
meet him
conference
in
together.
Detroit.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. 2 years ago.
Well, it's funny. I had the conversation with Michael yesterday, and it was about an hour before I realized that it was two Imhoteps. It's like, oh,
Oh yeah.
yeah. But anyway, it's a powerful name. I think if I were to name myself, it would probably be Heru Imhotep.
Well, we can make it like the Arabs do Muhammad. Like everybody's named Muhammad. Everybody's some Imhotep. So we can start that trend.
All right, brother
But I
Lynn.
appreciate y'all again, and
All right.
I'll see y'all later.
Thank you, there, my brother.
You're
All
welcome.
right.
You're welcome.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, we just want to
Lynn.
let everybody know that. Yeah, just everybody know we remind you the 23rd of June for our African ball at the Mediterranean, the Motherland Connection, and then the 29th downtown Mall Seed Parade and Festival. So we want you to join, come out with your lawn chairs or what have you. If you want to participate, 216-323-6155, 216-323-6155.
All right. To our listening audience, we're about to migrate over to our Facebook and YouTube platforms. We would like to encourage you to stay with us. Go to those channels, like, subscribe, comment, hit the notification bell, do what you can to help us with our various missions. And in a few moments, we are going to welcome Brother Michael Imhotep. And in the last few moments I just want to thank Tone Harley, our engineer. He makes it happen for us every week, and we so appreciate what he does for us. To those who are listening on radio, know yourself, love yourself, be yourself, and make today your best day. Peace.
Peace.
So, Brother Michael Imhotep is the founder of the African History Network and host of the African History Network show, Sundays from 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on social media and Blog Talk Radio. And for 7 years on 9:10 a.m., the Superstation WFDF Detroit. He's an historian, radio show host, researcher, lecturer, and writer. He's a weekly panelist on the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show on Fridays at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, providing political and historical analysis on the Black Star Media Network. His bio is extensive, and there's probably a lot more that we could say.
Yeah, you don't have to go through the whole bio.
I had to go through the whole thing, but I did want to
go through the whole thing.
A sense of who he is and what he has been doing. And I'll say this, a few weeks ago, I witnessed an interview that you did, Brother Michael, with Professor Manu Ampim, someone who Brother Antonio connected with sometime within the past year. And we were just blown away by what he brought to us in terms of history. I'm sure that there's so much between the two of you that resonates. So we're really happy that we were able to make this connection and bring what you bring to our listening audience. So why don't we start just by you telling us about the African History Network that you have and what that mission is, and what that whole vehicle is all about.
Okay, and yeah, Manu is a friend of mine. I've interviewed him a number of times over the years, going back to about 2010. I think was when I first interviewed him in 2010. So the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's correct wrong behavior. So I'm a talk show host, as you said. I've been doing the African History Network show 14 years. It's been 14 years since May 10th, 2024. 7 years was on 910 AM WFDF here in Detroit. And, we deal with history, current events, politics, economic empowerment issues pertaining to African Americans. So we do the show usually Sundays. I may do broadcasts during the week. I edit excerpts of my appearances in different media platforms. So we have all that. People can go to our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Also follow me on Facebook, The African History Network on Facebook, and Michael Imhotep on YouTube. Okay, so this is, dealing with, and I've interviewed a number of scholars over the years. Some of my teachers, Dr. Leonard Jeffries, Professor James Small, Professor Kabahaya Wafa Kamene, had Dr. Claude Anderson on the show over the years as well. People like Runoko Rashidi before he passed away. We have I've interviewed a number of different scholars who are ancestors now, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, Dr. Richard King, Dr. Fukiao. So it's so many people. We've had probably maybe about 1,500 episodes of the show. So it's a lot of work, but this is something that's needed, and we're focusing on, as I say in a lot of my lectures, because I do lectures also, this type of information has to bring about behavior modification. That's why our motto is right now is correct wrong behavior. It's not about debating people. I tell people, we don't learn all this information to participate in some black version of Jeopardy. Okay, to see who can memorize the most facts and figures and win a prize at the end of the TV show. No, this information has to bring about behavior modification. Right now, it's correct wrong behavior. If you become quote unquote conscious, and the term is problematic, but if you become quote unquote conscious, but your behavior doesn't change, what's the point? What's the purpose? Okay, so that's in a nutshell some of what we do.
Okay. Well, I have to tell you that many of the folks that you mentioned are folks that we've had on our broadcast as well.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of it is due to relationships that Brother Hamtonio has with many of these folks. We've had Dr. Jeffries on. As I mentioned to you yesterday, we had Dr. Malefi Asante on.
Oh, me. I've had Malefi on too. Yeah. Yes. Tony
Dr.
Browder, Malefi. Yeah.
Yeah, Tony, and he's been here. I mean, some of the folks that you mentioned are folks that we've actually brought to Cleveland. And again, I'll tip my hat to Brother Antonio for what he did to make those things possible. But what it all really speaks to is the power of our intellect. I think that the most dangerous weapon in the face of what I call pseudo white supremacy psychosis, because I don't embrace the idea of saying white supremacy, because it's a fallacy. White people are not superior to black folk. And as a matter of fact, white people don't even exist if you want to look at it in a technical sense. You also mentioned that you deal with history, but you also deal with current events. And when I looked at I looked at your Facebook page and I saw a number of references to things that were going on. So I hope that we can expand our conversation, not just to history, but also to deal with some of the things that are going on in our country right now. For instance, we're in the midst of a political season. And if you look at the stuff that's coming back channel, there are rumblings that Joe Biden is not going to be running for president in 2024, but there's actually a shadow candidate that's being groomed right now. And sometime this summer, there's going to be a decision to pivot from running JB and putting someone else in there, because they're concerned, and I don't like to say his name, but there's concern that 45 basically could get reelected in spite of all the adversity, the personal adversity that he's facing right now. And I just wonder how it's even possible for us to entertain the thought that our political system is just so dysfunctional right now.
Right. Well, I've heard of rumors. I wouldn't put stock in rumors of a shadow candidate or things like that. They're always distractions. It's just like on my show, we've broken down how no third party candidate has won a single electoral college vote since 1968. And it takes 270 electoral college votes to become president elect. You win electoral college votes by winning, not by the electoral college voting. That doesn't take place until the first Monday following the second Wednesday in December, which is in the middle of December. You win electoral college votes associated with the state by winning the popular vote in the state. So anybody that tells you that the popular vote doesn't matter has not read the U.S. Constitution. The popular vote does matter. Republicans know that. Many of us don't. And we fall for these tricks. That's how Donald Trump won the electoral college vote in 2016, and Hillary Clinton got 2.9 million more popular votes, because we've never been taught to really play the game of politics to win. I teach about political self-defense. Political self-defense. First thing you have to do is read the U.S. Constitution, because if you don't understand the U.S. Constitution, you won't understand any of this. That's why the U.S. Census is so important. The U.S. Census was created by the Constitution. First census taken in 1790. The census that the last census that took place in 2020, the population of white people in this country was 57%. That was the first time the population of white people in this country dropped below 60% since 1790. Okay, that scared a lot of people, because there's a fear of the browning of America. Now, all white people don't have this fear, but there's enough of them that have this fear to make a difference. It's enough of them who have this fear to be a threat. There's a fear that by the year 2043, white people will no longer be the majority population in this country. And you have media outlets like Fox News, like Newsmax, right-wing talk radio, that prey on this fear, that feed them fear, okay, that drive them towards somebody like a Donald Trump. And in 2016, many white people saw Trump as the great white hope. They saw him as a last resort. Because if you go back, I covered the 2016 campaign extensively on 910 AM WFDF on the African History Network show, right? For a lot of white people, he wasn't their first, second, third, fourth, or fifth choice. Right. But they said, I watched about 100 interviews that Trump did and campaign rallies. And then I watched numerous interviews with Trump supporters or people who were reluctant Trump supporters. And overwhelmingly, they said, this is about the Supreme Court. They said, this is about the federal bench. OK, well, for many of us, we don't really understand that the president nominates Supreme Court justices, which are lifetime appointments, and the president nominates federal judges. Federal judges are confirmed by the U.S. Senate. So Donald Trump got 226 federal judges confirmed because Republicans took back control of the Senate in 2014, led by Mitch McConnell. McConnell and Republicans blocked 103 federal judge nominations that President Barack Obama made after 2014, and blocked Merrick Garland, who was Obama's nominee for the Supreme Court. So then when Trump becomes president, because we didn't understand how the Electoral College works, you have all these vacancies. So then, and lastly, and I'll turn it back over to you, but lastly, the nominations, that the names for the Supreme Court nominees and the federal judges were given to Trump largely from lists from the Heritage Foundation and the Federalist Society. Okay, now the Heritage Foundation is a right-wing think tank, and one of the things they do is work on voter suppression tactics. And if you don't believe me, go read the article that Ari Berman did for Mother Jones, exposing Heritage Action for America, which is their sister organization, and how Heritage Action for America was the entity that crafted Senate Bill 201 in Georgia, the voter suppression bill in Georgia, as well as copycat bills passed in state legislatures, especially a lot of former Confederate states. Jessica Anderson is the executive director of Heritage Action for America, and she was caught talking in a meeting, and she was recorded and it was released, and Mother Jones published it, talking about how they were the ones that crafted Senate Bill 201. And that was a backlash to Joe Biden winning Georgia in 2020. There was a backlash to the January 5th, 2021 special election that Senator Raphael Warnock won and Senator John Ossoff won, that gave Democrats control of the Senate. It was a 50-50 Senate, but they had control over the Senate. This was a backlash to all of this. So the reason why things are confusing now, and the momentum is shifting toward Biden-Harris right now, if you pay attention to the latest polls, and if you pay attention to what's taking place in the campaign, the momentum is shifting, but it's May, and most people don't pay attention to presidential campaigns really until after Labor Day. Okay. But the Biden-Harris campaign, they're not waiting until after Labor Day. This thing is steadily ramping up. They've opened over 150 campaign offices across the country in the last few months. So this thing is steadily wrapping up. But what we have to understand is history, economics, law, and politics. The acronym I use, HELP. History, economics, law, and politics. Okay. And we have to practice political self-defense.
Agree.
Absolutely.
Totally agree. And that system that, you know, that's been our downfall forever. You know, I'm not knowing how those things would, you know, and they also talk about, you know, the things that happen as far as locally is concerned, you know.
Oh, absolutely.
Your local politicians, and that directly affect you, you know. And when we tend as Black folks, like, you know, I like the statement, and I live by that statement too, that you said earlier. If it's not going to change the way you think, you know, you have to
your behavior
information, you know. And,
yes.
and that's the frustration that I have, you know, with different people, you know, is that when hopefully you would like to think, and, you know, and you don't want to be naive, that if presented with certain information and certain facts, that you use that information and try to incorporate it into your way of thinking, your way of living, and things to make you a better person, you know. And I think, and I'm pretty sure you think too, you know, by doing what you're doing, is that our folks, and taking it a little broader and bringing and talking about Black folks, as our ancestors have laid down the foundation for us, you know, how to deal with these issues. Yes, of course, you know, you have to modify it a little bit because we're dealing with in this particular age, but there are some structural foundational things that are constant regardless on what time of the century that you are operating in, that is helpful to us, because right now we all over the place, you know. Our ancestors are looking at us like, you don't try everything but me. when you gonna try me? And you see this not working for you, because they, you know, with this whole universal principle piece and understanding balance like that, just those little principles alone of dealing with balance and understanding that kind of harmony, it will do so much for Black folks just by understanding that piece as well. You know, real quickly, you know, how we look at the whole religious piece, how the system that we got set up in America. Women were shied upon. They couldn't even be in the pulpit to even preach.
Right.
Their voice was silent. You know what I mean?
Right.
And something Dr. Henry Clark said, you know, this side would never work until we put the woman where she belonged, because it was about balance.
Yes.
And so again, as I stated before, we're letting the children run the system. You know, they the newcomers on the planet, and we letting them, just like I said before, throwing the kids out the parents out the house and letting the kids run the show. And it's just a matter of time that dysfunction is going to happen.
Yeah. You know, when we look at you having a conversation with Asar Imhotep a few minutes ago, somebody asked the question, are we the same people? No, we're not. No, we're not the same people. But when we look at, if we look at the modern day civil rights movement, for example, okay, look at Dr. King and Ralph Abernathy and John Lewis and Ella Baker Rosa Parks, okay, the modern day, what was called the modern day civil rights movement. That civil rights movement was largely led by African-American male Protestant ministers. And many of them were misogynists, because you're dealing with a society that is misogynistic. You have white male patriarchy, and then that's infused into Christianity. Okay, so they grew up in that. They grew up in that ideology to varying degrees, and then a lot of them brought that mentality into the modern day civil rights movement, which is why Ella Baker leaves the Southern Christian Leadership Conference that she helped co-found in 1957 after she was passed over for a permanent leadership position in SCLC, because Dr. King and others didn't think that women belonged in permanent leadership positions. You know, Dr. King was one of our greatest leaders, very much misunderstood. Brother Vince talked about Manu Ampem, and I've done interviews with Manu previously where we dealt with the distortion of Dr. King's legacy. That brother was a revolutionary. Okay. And toward the end of both Dr. King and Malcolm X's life, their ideologies were converging. You read Martin, Malcolm and America, A Dream or a Nightmare by James H. Cone. That was probably one of the first books that, and I read that back in 1994 when I was in college. That was probably one of the first books that really went in depth and dealt with the trajectory of both of their lives and how their ideologies are converging. And when we talk about Malcolm, we know his birthday is coming up May 19th. People really forget Malcolm joins the civil rights movement when he leaves the Nation of Islam. Yes, he had Organization of Afro-American Unity, but Malcolm goes to speak to SNCC. He meets with Coretta Scott King in January, I think it was January 1965. He goes to Selma. He wants to meet with Dr. King a second time. They met March 26, 1964 at the U.S. Senate debate for the Civil Rights Act. This is later in the same month that Malcolm officially separated from the Nation of Islam, March 8th, 1964, and the month before he leaves for his Hajj to Mecca. But when you study both of these two men, these were revolutionaries, okay? And one of the themes of the Battle of the Bullet that Malcolm delivers March 29th, 1964 in Washington Heights, New York, and then April 3rd, 1964 in Cleveland, Ohio, Corey Methodist Church, and then April 12th, 1964, King Solomon Baptist Church in Detroit. One of the themes of the Battle of the Bullet was interjecting Black nationalism into the civil rights movement. Okay, so one, when we cannot suppress African-American women the same way white men suppress their women. Okay, right. We can't do that. Mm-hmm. And when we study traditional African society, we saw the position of the woman elevated. Okay. Yeah. And two, when we have our various movements, we cannot bring white male patriarchy into those movements dressed up in red, black, and green.
Absolutely.
So true. So true. Mm-hmm. Brother Michael, I want to go back to what we were talking about in terms of population. And yes. You talked about 2043 and then the paradigm shift and white folks mm-hmm. are no longer the majority. There are some who might be saying that shift has already happened, but I'm just curious about this hot button topic of immigration right now, because we're getting mm-hmm. these stories about all these mass exoduses taking place and all these folks coming into the country, and many of them are not classically white folks. I'm wondering what impact you think that will have on the paradigm of our population and perhaps a shift in power.
Well, let's approach it like this. First of all, immigration policies in America are broken, and it is going to take congressional legislation to fix them. Now, you had the strongest immigration bill that would have been passed in at least 30 years that was just killed by Donald Trump because he didn't want to give Joe Biden a win, and he wants to run on immigration and the border and broken immigration policies, because this is Donald Trump's stay out of prison tour. This is why he announced he was running for president so early, okay? Because he wants to be immune for prosecution. He wants to be able to appoint an attorney general who will kill any federal prosecution against him and his cronies. Okay, so if you're so concerned, they talk about fentanyl coming across the border illegally. They talk about undocumented immigrants coming across, things like this. So if the border was such a problem, why did you tell Republicans in the House to kill the border bill? And Senator John Langford of Oklahoma, conservative Republican, he led the way for this bill in the Senate. And he said, even if Trump is nominated, and other Republicans said this as well, even if Trump is reelected and Republicans maintain control of the House and gain control of the Senate, he said, you're not going to get a stronger immigration bill. Okay, so you have, and the other thing is, I tell people, if you want to stop undocumented immigration, if you want to really crack down on it, first thing you should do is stop eating food that you did not grow yourself, because most likely somebody undocumented was involved in that food getting to your plate. Okay, number one. Number two, when we look at this as a system, right? White supremacy pits groups of oppressed people against each other to fight one another so that the 1% or 5% or 10% can maintain power and manipulate everybody. Okay. This is something that's very, very important to understand, because people will target people leaving other countries coming here because they either are facing political persecution in their countries, because of climate change in their countries, devastating vegetation, okay, or because of other reasons, right? What they don't focus on is, and I think it was Vice.com had an article about this maybe 5 or 10 years ago. When we look at Central America, the U.S. has been involved in shaping policies in Central America that have helped create the condition that a lot of people from Central America are fleeing.
Come on.
So then they come to this country, and then you blame them, but you don't look at the conditions that were created that they're fleeing from. Like when Guatemala, when the CIA helped overthrow the Guatemalan democratically elected Guatemalan government, I think it was 1954. Okay, and then Donald Trump, like in 2016, he loved to talk about the gang, was it not MSI, it's the gang, I forgot, it'll come to me. It's a Latin gang, it's a Mexican gang he loved to talk about. Okay, and that became like the poster child for MS-13. I think
I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, MS-13. He loved to talk about that gang. He didn't tell you that gang started in California in the 1980s and then went into Mexico. Okay, he didn't talk about that at all. He just says, "Oh, this is a Mexican gang and they're committing all these crimes." So yes, you need new immigration laws. Yes, you do. Okay, but at the same time, we have to understand how non-white groups and even some white groups, because so Vince talked about you really don't have anything called white people. Okay, so let's deal with that term white. The term white started being used basically about 1681, starting in the colony of Virginia, after Bacon's Rebellion of 1675 and 1676 in the colony of Virginia. Now, this is before you have what's called the United States. You still have colonies. This is before the Articles of Confederation. This is before the U.S. Constitution, the Philadelphia Convention, 1787. The Bacon's Rebellion was led by Nathaniel Bacon, who was a European white man, Englishman, and he was a tobacco plantation owner. All right. His rebellion consisted of about 500 African Americans. So you had some free African Americans, you had some who were enslaved, you had white indentured servants and poor whites. They united in this rebellion against the ruling elite in the colony of Virginia, against the wealthy plantation owners, because they understood that they were all being exploited by the same 1%. They were all being exploited by the same group of people. And in December of 1775, this band burned down the town of Jamestown, Virginia. I don't know how many people know this history. Go research Bacon's Rebellion at history.com, the official website of the History Channel. They have an extensive article on Bacon's Rebellion. Now, when they burned down the town of Jamestown, Virginia, I don't know if this became the inspiration for the song, the roof is on fire. Maybe it was. I don't know. Okay. But what happened, more importantly, what happened was after Bacon's Rebellion. It's going to be about 1680, 1681, that in the colony of Virginia, they start implementing the term white for widespread usage to refer to people coming from Europe, in the English, and people coming from Europe. Why did they do this? Because previously, and when you read chapter 2 of Before the Mayflower by Lerone Bennett Jr., and we deal with a lot of this in my online history classes that I teach, okay? In chapter 2 of Before the Mayflower, 6th edition, Lerone Bennett Jr. talks about how, page 40, he talks about how what we call white people didn't refer to themselves as white. They referred to themselves as English or Englishmen or Christians. And he talks about how the terms for Black people or African Americans at that time was we had the terms Moor, Black or Moor, Neger, Neger, and Nagar, Negar. Okay. When you look at why the term white was implemented in the colony of Virginia, and then it's going to be adopted by other colonies as well, it was to break up the alliance between these non-white people who were ruling. It was to break up the alliance of free African people, enslaved African people, white indentured servants, and poor whites. Okay, so that the ruling elite could manipulate all of them. And what they did was they implemented chattel slavery, because it wasn't until about 1641 in the colony of Massachusetts that you had your first codified slave laws in the what we would call the 13 colonies. Okay, you had African people entering into some form of what we would call indentured servitude. They would serve 5 to 7 years and then be released. Chattel slavery in the 13 colonies didn't exist at this time. Okay, in the early 1600s. It's going to be after Bacon's Rebellion, right around 1681, that they start changing this to change the treatment of African people and to make a distinction between African people and especially poor white people who had an alliance, because they realized they were being both manipulated. So then they're going to institute chattel slavery. They're going to have harsher treatment for those identified as African, and they're going to use the term white to identify all of what we would call European people, to put all those people on team white, to make poor white people think they're on the same team as the wealthy plantation owners who are exploiting them, right, to reduce their ability and desire to fight back. Okay, so and we're still dealing with this trick bag today, because you have poor white people voting for Trump, and he's never cared about poor white people. He's never cared about middle-class white people. He's only cared about the wealthy. And he just had a campaign meeting with wealthy billionaires, and he's asking them for $1 billion, and he's telling them he's going to reverse Biden's climate change laws, his climate change policies. He's going to reverse all that. New York Times has an article about this. Okay, so people have to You know, I haven't followed any of this Drake Kendrick Lamar beef. I don't know what the hell they're talking about. Okay. But I can tell you what's going on with this. I can tell you what's going on with things that are going to have consequences for us. All right. If people want to follow entertainment, okay, that's fine. But I don't know what they're talking about. But I can tell you what's going on with this that's going to have a direct impact on our conditions.
Come on, bro. Yes, yes, absolutely. You know, one second, Vince. I was when you said a couple things, and I mirror a lot of that what you said, and I try to talk to people about this whole immigration piece. I'm just gonna step back on that real quick about people coming over here, and I don't even know why Black folks even taking on a charge, or even talking about immigration like it affects them. You know, because a lot of the jobs that they do, and we, you know, like you said, we're not out there trying to do it anyway. But the question I want to ask, and we tend not to pay attention to directly and indirectly, our involvement in these particular countries that are causing them to flee. See, we never think about, you know, we sitting here in the belly of the beast. And not really recognizing these tentacles that are out there manipulating everything. That's why, you know, when Vince brings it up all the time, talking about BRICS, the reason you got a BRICS is that they've been weaponizing the dollar, and folks tired of getting their behind beat with the weaponization of the dollar. So they're looking at another alternative. And this is why. So the question I want to ask, and what people should look at, would these people leave their country and come here if we wasn't involved in some of the dirty dealings that we're dealing with in their country that's causing them to flee? Because I truly believe a lot of them wouldn't want to give up their homes. They would want to stay in their culture, to stay in their way of life of doing things. Because when you want to look at it, all they're doing is come for economic reason, because there's really nothing culturally and spiritually that's in this country that would drive them away from their culture to want to come here. If their conditions, the question I would ask, if their conditions was okay, if they was living okay in there, nobody was bothering them, would they leave their country to come to here? That's the question.
Well, when we look at, and I'm posting some articles here, hopefully you can share them, because I'm posting articles to back up what I'm saying. One, they're looking for better ways of life. It's not just economic. It's partly economic, but also many of them are fleeing various types of political violence, rapes, murders, things like this. Also, you have some that are victims of political persecution. So they're coming here because you have, you know, more freedom of speech. You can publicly criticize the president and not end up in prison. Now, we don't know what happens if Trump becomes president again, but you can. So you have those freedoms here. Okay. Now, also, to give you an example here, a lot of people don't know this. Starting with the Herbert Hoover administration, Herbert Hoover wins the presidency in 1928. Okay, he serves one term, mishandles the Great Depression. And President and Franklin Delano Roosevelt is elected in the 1932 presidential election. There were about 1.6 million Mexicans who were deported by the U.S. back to Mexico, starting with Herbert Hoover, and starting in the Great Depression. The Great Depression begins 1929, stock market crash of October 1929. And the government was saying that these Mexicans were taking jobs away from white people in the country. Okay. About 60% of the people they deported were born here legally, were actual U.S. citizens, but they got lumped into this. And when we look at the analysis post that event happening, because it starts with Herbert Hoover, it's going to continue with President Roosevelt. Okay. When you look at the analysis decades later, they talk about how, okay, they didn't take it to the account that they were actually contributing to the GDP. those Mexicans that you deported were actually producing services, producing goods. They were actually contributing to the GDP, which created jobs. But they just focused on falsely, oh, they're here, so they're taking jobs from white people. Okay. Now, this is taking place in the 1930s and going into the 1940s. And this was the sentiment. All right. But and they overlooked the fact that about 60% of people they were deporting were here legally. Okay. So it's and that whole term, being that you had like 2.6 billion acres of land largely stolen from Native Americans and African people as well, because one of the people I've interviewed on my show numerous times, probably 12, 13 times, was Dr. David Imhotep before he passed away in 2023. And he was a friend of mine, and we did lectures together here in Detroit, did a couple of lectures together. But he was the author of The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence. The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence. He deals with the African presence in this country going back at least 51,700 years before. These would be the Khoisan. And this was before Native Americans even came into existence. So understanding the history of the Louisiana Purchase and the U.S. getting 828,000 square miles of land from France, and France stole the land from Native Americans and Africans who were here, things like this. So when I hear, white people start calling somebody illegal, I'm like, dude, you really don't want to have this conversation. Okay. You really don't want to get into this history. Okay. Then California, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, Nevada, all that was part of Mexico. The reason why the U.S. gets that land is because of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo of 1848, which is what ends the Mexican-American War. And the U.S. pays, I think it was something like $15 million for that land, but it's part of the treaty that ends the Mexican-American War. Mm-hmm. But the Mexican-American War was triggered basically over a border dispute, a land dispute, and the U.S. really wanted to take over the entire North American continent. The U.S. wanted to expand, okay? And they really wanted to take over the entire North American continent. So it's like, you really got to be careful when you start calling people illegal. And then Florida was part of Spain. That was all conquered by Spain. Florida was conquered by Spain. Juan Ponce de Leon, 1513. Mexico was ruled by Spain for something like 300 years, right? All part of that European exploration coming out of the Dark Ages. So yeah, you really want to be careful with that. And if you want to crack down on undocumented immigrants, crack down on corporations hiring them. Mm-hmm. If you want to crack down on undocumented immigrants, crack down on corporations hiring. And the first place you should look at is Donald Trump's golf courses and his hotels and things like that. Because he got busted because he was hiring undocumented. He had undocumented immigrants there working. That came out a few years ago.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Brother Michael, you mentioned Malcolm X and his birthday coming up on the 19th. We also spoke a bit about Martin Luther King and the revolutionary aspect of them. I'm also thinking about Carter G. Woodson. And I
absolutely.
Think, and this is partly relevant because of our brother Lynn here, who was involved with the ASLAALH, the Association for the Study of African American Life History. A few months ago, I was privy to a conversation about Carter G. Woodson and his affinity to African history. And I just wanted to have this conversation and have Lynn present for the conversation, because there is conversation about the pushback on African history and the focus on Black history and the disassociation of that affinity to African history within Asala. Part of the conversation was how at a certain point we should probably pivot from just Black history and embrace the idea of African history. And I was just wondering what your thoughts were about that. It seems as though when we celebrate Black History Month here in America, we focus exclusively on Black history and we don't expand it when the two are connected.
Right.
They're intertwined. they're
Right.
in bed with each other, and we need to have a greater perspective and a broadened perspective because of our relationship to Africa.
Right. So part of that conversation, that was part of the conversation I had with Professor Manu and Pim when I interviewed him. I think that was in April of this year, 2024. People can watch that full interview on my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, Imhotep, or on my Facebook fan page, the African History Network. So, yeah. So Dr. Carter G. Woodson talked about African Heritage Month. Okay. Really, this was part of the conversation I had with Manu and Pim. That was that would be the next, that would be the expansion of the celebration of what started out as Negro History Week to African Heritage Month, with the focus on Africa and African history. So if we look at the creation of what started out as Negro History Week, the second week in February 1926, Dr. Carter G. Woodson and Asala creates this back at the time of Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. Okay, Dr. Woodson was an educator. He had a PhD in American history from Harvard. He taught at a high school, but he also taught at the college level as well. He taught at Howard University for 1 year. Okay, and he understood, because he was an educator, he understood that African Americans knew basically nothing about their history. So Negro History Week was never designed to be the only time of the year that we study our history. It was, he chose the second week in February, not because February is the shortest month of the year, not because it's the coldest month of the year, but he chose the second week in February because it contains the birth dates of Abraham Lincoln, February 12th, and Frederick Douglass, February 14th, which is Frederick Douglass' assumed birthday, because Douglass didn't know his exact birth date and he didn't know the exact year that he was born. So since celebrations were already taking place in the African American community, basically since the assassination of Abraham Lincoln in 1865, and since Frederick Douglass dies in 1895, since those celebrations were already taking place in the African American community, Dr. Carter G. Woodson puts his new cultural celebration within that same period of time, because celebrations are already going on. The Negro History Week, later Black History Month, or African American History Month, was designed to celebrate, teach, study, and acknowledge the contributions that African Americans have made to this country, but also on the continent of Africa. Okay, the continent of Africa was not separate from the celebration, okay, based upon Dr. Woodson's original intent. And there has been an annual theme for African American History Month since 1928. The annual theme is designed to give purpose, to give direction in how you celebrate, what you study, things like this. So it's not saying this is the only thing that you can study, but it gives purpose and direction. And the annual theme is also supposed to be timely to what is taking place in society, what's taking place in the country. So just to give you a quick example, the annual theme for 1928 was Civilization, a World Achievement. 1933, Ethiopia meets Era and Truth. Ethiopia meets Era and Truth. 1935, the Negro Achievements in Africa. The Negro Achievements in Africa. 1936, African Background Outlined. 1960, now he dies in 1950, okay? 1960, Strengthening America Through Education in Negro History and African Culture. 1971, African Civilization and Culture, a Worthy Historical Background. So Dr. Woodson did extensive research on Africa, African history. He wrote his last 3 articles. He wrote with dealing with Egypt, as Professor Manu and Pam talked about. He talked about how Kush and Ethiopia were the precursors to Egypt. These are the mothers and grandmothers of Egypt. So he's steeped in this history. The criticism Professor Manu and Pym had of Asala today is that Asala largely embraces the African-American history, largely to the exclusion of the African history. And what Woodson is saying is that you have to study all of this together. Okay, you can't just separate African-American history from African history, as well as in African history connects you to the history of African people throughout the diaspora. So African Heritage Month, which was also Woodson's vision, taking things to the next level, is moving in the same thought process of combining all of that together. And one of the biggest problems I have with the way Black History Month or African American History Month is celebrated across the country. It should be celebrated. It should be, we should have celebrations. We should recognize it and participate in it. But most people who participate in these celebrations, and I would say even organize these celebrations, the majority of them have never really studied Dr. Carter G. Woodson and never studied the history of African American History Month and why it was created. So so we get into, I oftentimes talk about how we don't have to keep recycling the same 15 to 20 sanitized Negroes every year, every February, because largely that's what happens. Or we get into these things that are like really superfluous, don't have substance, and people don't understand that African American History Month can be a very powerful tool to educate our people, but also educate America on history and the accomplishments, what African people have contributed to this country, but also to the world. So we're not using it as a powerful tool to educate and liberate. Okay, it becomes just a celebration. It becomes something, to do because it's February. If we don't do it, people are going to say we're not Black. So we're going to have some type of celebration. Okay. And a lot of these celebrations become watered down. And unfortunately, some of these celebrations give the appearance also that they are trying to make white people feel comfortable with the oppression of African Americans as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And another factor is just our disassociation with Africa because of what we've been taught through our educational process. The last thing some of us would want to be identified as is an African, but our dear brother Rashidi, he always talked about the idea of just
Rashidi. Yeah.
You were born outside of Africa, but it doesn't make you any less African because it's in our DNA.
Well, but you have white people running to Egypt. You had going back to the 1800s, you had European archaeologists claiming Egypt for themselves, claiming Nubia for themselves. When Napoleon conquers Egypt in 1798, Napoleon Bonaparte. You have the discovery of King Tutankhamun's tomb, 1922. So Europeans are constantly running to Africa. They're constantly running to Egypt, claiming Egypt for themselves, claiming Nubia for themselves. When you look at Carthage, Hannibal Barca, the Carthaginians, that's in the area that today is Tunisia, North Africa. They claim that Hannibal was white. They claimed Hannibal was white. Okay, when you look at Emperor Menelik II, the Battle of Adwa, 1896, defeating the Italians. The Italians got their behinds kicked so badly by the Ethiopians. The Italians told the world that the Ethiopians were white because they didn't want people to know that this Black nation defeated them. So you have, and then when we look at mythology, right, coming out of the Dark Ages, because coming out of the 1300s, going into the 1400s, European exploration, the start of the transatlantic slave trade, 1441 with the Portuguese, going into the 1500s. As Europe starts to rebuild itself, okay, Europe was hit with civil war, famine, poverty, things like this. The bubonic plague hits in 1347, hits in spurts from 1347 to 1400. Europe loses estimates of somewhere between 25 to 75 million people, right? As Europe starts to rebuild itself, conquer people's lands, go into the Caribbean, set up plantations and start to rebuild itself, one of the things that they do is reinterpret image. Okay, so the Black Madonna and Child that Runoko Rashidi talks about a lot, and he talks about in his book Black Star, the African Presence in Europe, which deals with the African presence in early Europe. France had about 300 images of the Black Madonna and Child, paintings and statues, things like this. And this is even before the presence of the Black Madonna and Child goes back to Asar, Arset, and Heru, who the Greeks called Osiris, Isis, and Horus. Even before the Moors go into the Iberian Peninsula, today known as Spain and Portugal, in 711 AD, and take the teachings from the Nile Valley region of Africa all throughout Europe. This is even before that. They have these images of what we today call a Black Madonna and Child. As Europeans start gaining power and rebuilding these European nations, you start having a rise in the dominance of the European phenotype. So they start reinterpreting image. So in the early 1600s, Michelangelo paints the Sistine Chapel, and he uses his aunt and uncle as the model for Adam and Eve, and they're white. God is white. The angels are white. When you look at Greek mythology, Zeus, who was the king of the gods, Zeus was said to be from Ethiopia originally, but Zeus gets reinterpreted as a European. Hercules was black. Hercules gets reinterpreted as a European. So one of the things that they do with when you had a rise in these European powers is to reinterpret image. And then when you have European archaeology going in and making these discoveries in Egypt and Nubia, things like that, then they're going to say that these were brown-skinned Caucasians or something like that. But they wanted to totally separate Egypt from Africa and say, oh no, these are not black Africans because you enslaved black Africans. These are not them. This is something else. And they played the same trick with Nubia. Okay. They were saying, they tried to claim Nubia for themselves and say that these were some type of Caucasians or brown-skinned Caucasians or something like that. But these weren't sub-Saharan Africans. These weren't black Negroes like the ones that we had enslaved for hundreds of years. This was something totally different. And what they do is they have to, in various ways, de-Africanize something to then elevate the value and importance of it so they can claim it for themselves.
Yeah,
that's like I said, that's a normal tactic that, you know, they control that narrative. And so therefore, you know, you tell the lie and you know, after time, people begin to believe it. And so, and you got to ask yourself, you know, this superior race that we talk about, why, as they're going around all over the planet taking our stuff? Why is all our stuff in Europe? You know what I mean? And
right.
And you haven't.
You're talking about like treasures. You're talking about artifacts, things like that. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they claimed it for themselves.
Yeah. You the developers and the originators of all this stuff, but no place in your homeland do you have any of these, you know, monumental structures there, but it's yours. And it's just like the Arabs over there. I never forget a tape that I got from Brother Quasi, and he showed, and I think Brother Pim talks about it as well, that the Arabs over there chipping the, you know, the hieroglyphics off and you know, selling them, and you know, if that is sacred to you and that's your stuff, you're not going to defame it and do the things that you do to it. You know what I mean? Right. If it's your stuff. Well, you know, it's just that simple. And everybody knows it's a documented fact. You guys didn't come around to the 6th, 7th century over there, as far as the Arabs is concerned.
Yeah, 7th
But
century AD. Yep.
yes, yeah. So my point is, you know, why? If this all about superiority or keeping on with this old mirage about their presence of them knowing not even knowing where they come from because they can't trace their lineage nowhere. You know what I mean? And so if this all a ploy, a part of the whole plan, because you got to stop at one point and ask yourself a question: why? Why are we going through all this time, money, energy to defame, to lie, to tell half truths, and do the things that they do, to cover up and not talk about our presence here in America? You know, the things that us being here and things like that. You know, nothing.
Right.
Nothing not discovered until we go. Even though they may have another name for it, people living there, things, it don't matter. It's all about them.
It's about the
Right.
narrative. Brother Michael, I wanted to ask you if you had
Yes.
heard any of the social media fodder, I'll call it, about Vladimir Putin and his announcement about all these black images of the Madonna and child and so forth and so on, and then them having access to that and making it public. Have you heard anything about it? And
Oh yeah.
if so, do you think it's relevant?
I've heard about it, and that has been in Europe for hundreds of, it's all throughout Europe for hundreds of years. That's not something new.
Right.
Yeah, you're dealing with a former KGB agent. That's not something new. That I just told you. France has the most, according to Renoka Rashidi, France has the most number of images of the Black Madonna and child. That's at about 300. Okay, and that's in his book Black Star: The African Presence in Early Europe. And what Renoko did was he traveled around the world and he took pictures to document this. So he has the pictures in his book, and I have his book here somewhere in the office because that's one of the books I use in my class. So I'm going to find that. But yeah, that people that study this history already know that stuff is in Russia. He's not telling us something that we don't know. The people that don't study this history and are amazed by it, and they're the ones impressed. I'm like, and that stuff's been there for hundreds of years. We know this, okay? And this deals with how, and what one of my teachers, Professor James Small, talks about how Europeans took fragments from the periphery of African spiritual systems to create Christianity. Okay. And so when you look at you read Christianity Before Christ by Dr. John G. Jackson, okay, and you start seeing where all this comes from with Christianity and how they took the teachings from the Nile Valley region of Africa, from the African spiritual system, and incorporated that into their stories in the Helios Biblos, the Sun Book, S-U-N, the Sun Book, right? And you deal
I'm
with,
laughing because I just said that to somebody last night. Go ahead.
yeah. So it's important for our people to read the Bible, but you have to understand what you're reading, and we have to also speak to people where they are. Okay, so the Bible can be used as a tool to be a bridge to get to take us back to where we were before foreigners, fakers, and fools came into the continent of Africa, misinterpreted what we had, distorted it, and represented it to the world like they created it themselves. All right, but you're dealing with for instance, you deal with Noah's Ark, right? Or actually, let's go back to Adam and Eve. Okay, that comes from an ancient Sumerian myth of Enki and Ninti, and Enki was the man, Ninti was the woman, but Ninti in Sumerian means woman of the rib or lady of the rib. Okay, that's an ancient. You're dealing with stories that are told over and over and over again. Over thousands of years, adapted to various people's cultures. Okay, so when we deal with Heru being born on December 25th to the Virgin Osset, and We deal with the Annunciation, the Immaculate Conception, the Virgin Birth, the Adoration. These are ancient African principles. These go back, the story of Asar Imhotep dates back to at least 3300 BC in ancient Nubia. Okay, at least. So you're talking about 5,000 years ago. All right. So, and because of largely the transatlantic slave trade, even though it was happening some before then, but for most African Americans, the reason why we're Christians is because our parents were Christians, our grandparents were Christians, our great grandparents were Christians, and our ancestors before them, largely because of the transatlantic slave trade. And we haven't reclaimed our mindset and our history and culture to really understand history prior to that. Okay. So, and this is not to attack Christianity, as Sister Nubia Wardford, who's a cultural anthropologist here in Detroit and goes to the Sudan and does archaeological excavations, as she's talked about on the African History Network show. She talks about how Christianity has actually done a lot to maintain the iconography from Africa. It's in the icons, and it's in the graphics and things like this. It's still there today. Okay, but a lot of the ideology is anti-African and has been used against us. Okay, so it's all in how the spiritual system or religion is used and whose cultural paradigm you're operating within.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's real quick, Vince. It's funny, man. It's just a validation and almost a revelation, because what you just said, about the similarities and where they got a lot of these stories.
Yes.
I was just telling somebody that last night. The same thing. Helios Billions. I'm saying, look, a lot of us marvel at what we may read in the Bible and Revelations and the prophesies. And I said, when they got together in the council, they took information and these stories from all you could find prophecies, or they talked about the future.
Right.
I mean, the point is, people think that's the only point of literature that talks about that. The Bible is the only book that speaks on futuristic things that could come to pass. And I'm just saying, they stole it out of those stories from other older stories.
Yeah, those are ancient stories coming from ancient
yeah.
Africa, coming from the Nile Valley region of Africa, ancient Kemet, Sumer, different things of this nature. So, and the cultural paradigm is extremely important, but also you mentioned the council. So there were 21 ecumenical councils from 325 AD, starting with the Council of Nicaea up until like the 1800s. One of the councils, the Third Council of Trent, about 15. Third Council of Trent was about 1563 or so. As a result of the Third Council of Trent, this is why you have the Gregorian calendar introduced about 1582 by Pope Gregory XIII, which is the calendar we use today. And they had to recalculate when Easter was celebrated, okay? Because Easter is celebrated on the first Sunday following the first full moon, following the vernal equinox. So Easter is a movable feast because it's based upon astronomy. Okay, now Christmas is based upon astronomy as well. It's based upon the movement of the sun entering into its lowest point, entering into the winter solstice, its lowest point around December 20th, December 21st, and then from December 22nd, 23rd, 24th, it appears the sun stands still. The sun does not move. And solstice actually means sun stands still when you look at the etymology of the word solstice. Then on December 25th, the sun moves 1 degree northward, and December 25th marks a increase in the amount of sunlight each day, the duration of the duration of the amount of sunlight. So starting on December 25th, the days start getting longer again. So in ancient times, December 25th was looked at as the birth date of the Son of God, or the Sun, the S-U-N, not the S-O-N. Okay, so all this gets incorporated into these celebrations. It gets incorporated into Christianity, and Christ is a title, not a name. Christ coming from the Greek Christos, which means anointed or anointed one, which comes from Karest, which is in the ancient Middle Nether language, ka, meaning spirit, rest meaning to rise, ka rest meaning the rising of the spirit. So all this comes from us. Okay, but we have to remember, we have to take back our minds, reclaim our history and culture, and see where all this comes from.
Yes, agreed.
I'm so glad that you put it within the perspective of Kemet, because when we look back at that original prototype of Asar, Aset, and Heru, it's not uncommon to hear people talking about Osiris, Isis, and Horus, and I kind of
well, that's what the Greeks call them.
Right.
That's
exactly.
what the Greeks called them. Yeah, but they worship them too, and a lot of the Greek deities were influenced by deities coming from ancient Kemet. As well as Roman deities also. They learned a lot of that from us. Okay, so we really have to take back this history. Now, because when we take back that history, everything else around us would change. And you have to have, Dr. Leonard Jeffries and Professor James Small, when they teach, as well as when I teach, they use what's called the pyramid principle. And I've modified it a little bit. So the foundation is African history and culture. African history and culture gives us our values, our interests, and our principles. This gives us a cultural paradigm that we see reality through. Okay, it gives us our history and culture, gives us our self-esteem, our self-development, our self-worth. If you I usually show the pyramid of Khafre in Giza, right? So the foundation is African history and culture. The two sides of the pyramid are economic empowerment and political empowerment. Your history and culture influences how you engage in the economics and your understanding of the economics, right? And then the other side of the pyramid is political empowerment and understanding politics and how you engage in politics. Now, politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. This is what politics is. Politics is far beyond just voting. Voting is one part of politics, and it's an important part, but it's not the only part of politics. Politics impacts every aspect of our lives, from the water we drink to the air we breathe to the food we eat. And for all the economic empowerment gurus out there, my degree is in business administration from Wayne State. I understand this better than most people and taught entrepreneurship for 7 years. Laws and policies govern and impact your economy and your economics. Okay. Now, when we look at the economic empowerment, we look at the economic part. African Americans have a deep, rich history of cooperative economics, the co-ops. Okay, whether it was mutual aid societies like the Free African Society in 1787 and the Free African Union in 1780, whether it was the Colored Merchants Association in 1928, coming out of the National Negro Business League, which was founded by Booker T. Washington. And the Colored Merchants Association was a cooperative of hundreds of African-American owned grocery stores across the country, whether it's the Colored Farmers Union, founded about in the 1880s in Texas, and this grows to 1.2 million members. We have, if people read Dr. Jessica Gordon Nimhard's book, Collective Courage, which deals with a deep history of the types of co-ops and how we engaged in economics. Okay, now right here in Detroit, you just had Detroit Food Co-op that just opened, Malika Kinney and many others. And this is an African-American owned grocery store that's structured as a cooperative. Okay, and they got tremendous coverage from local media here, a lot of buzz on social media. A ton of people. They opened, I think it was May 1st, and they have their grand opening May 18th, right? We have a deep, rich history of cooperatives in our businesses being structured like that, whether it's whether you have a business that may be owned by 2 or 3 people in a traditional structure and they're part of a larger cooperative, or you have a business that's actually structured as a cooperative where the members are also co-owners, okay, of the business. One of the most popular types of cooperatives today would be credit unions, where the people who have accounts are also what they refer to as members. Okay, they're also co-owners. So how you engage in economic empowerment, because you have a lot of people out here trying to pass off white capitalism dressed up in a red, black, and green dashiki and calling that economic empowerment for Black people. And that's not. Okay. Now you can learn some valuable things about marketing and accounting and different things like that, right? But when we actually deal with how we did this, William Washington Brown and the true reformers in 1881, when we actually study how we actually did that, it was through the cooperative system, largely.
Yeah, that whole piece, reminds me. And I mean, it's just funny, like you said. And that's something Dr. Leonard Jesse always said: take whatever you got and Africanize it. He always talks about that and mentions that, Africanize it. And I think that's again, that's always been the key to us learning, and something that Dr. Amos Wilson said about culture, because it's all interconnected. See, I mean,
Yes.
it was brilliant how people put this stuff together. I mean, come on, if you've been on the planet forever, you had to come up with some solutions on how to live with one another, how to run a community, a family, how to get along with other ethnic groups. You had to come about some kind of solutions, So everything is interconnected. And and some Dr. Amos Wilson said, culture. When people speak of culture, a lot of times they think about food, dress. He said, but culture is economics, and just like you just said with your pyramid, it's economics.
Right.
And if cultural states that we wear hats like I got on my head, guess what? Somebody in the community is going to make that hat, and we're going to spend our money with it. So a culture.
Yeah, that's a Kango. That's a Kango you wearing, brother. That's old school. I know about the Kango. I have a few myself, man. I started wearing Kangos, because of Run DMC and the Kango Kid, UTFO, and when I was a kid,
Samuel L.
Well, it wasn't because I started wearing Kangos because of hip hop. It wasn't because Samuel L. Jackson does wear Kangos, but I started wearing them because of hip hop. Okay. And when I was a kid, I couldn't afford Kangos. So when I became an adult, right, I could do that. So that goes back to Run DMC. That goes back to the rapper, the Kango Kid, who was known for Kangos. He was part of UTFO. Okay, they had the Roxanne songs, things like that, right? So that's what influenced me to, and also LL Cool J. Can't forget LL Cool J, right? That's what influenced me to wear Kangos.
Yeah, but like I said, if someone in our community was making Kangos or whatever, and it's culture, it is some cultural about that all of us partake in. Then culture is therefore economics as well. You know what I mean? And it's all interconnected,
Right, exactly.
Well, Brother Michael, I'm looking forward to our conversation next week. We talked about doing a part 2, and I'm looking forward to that. I'm going to promote your appearance on our show for the week on Facebook, as well as doing a promo on WERE, so people will be able to tune in during the radio hour. I know that you have a class to teach, and I got to go visit my mama. She lives 3 hours away, so I'm going to drive down to Chillicothe. But I really sincerely appreciate your presence on our show today, and look forward to having further conversations to bring the knowledge that you bring. It's obvious to me that you have a passion for history. It's reflected in how easily you just recall these years and events and so forth. So
absolutely, yeah.
I wish I was that good, brother. I wish I was. In the closing moments, if you would like to give us some more insight on your class and invite folks to the class that you're teaching.
And I just posted a link here. So visit my website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. I teach a class on Saturdays. Today is going to be 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's called Ancient Kemet, one of the original names for Egypt. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa. Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. So this is it's structured as a 10-week course, but we're going past 10 weeks. We have 4 sessions left, including today. We do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. And when you go to my website, we have my class lesson plan there. For each class, you can download the class lesson plan as well. We do thousands of years of history and what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. I've been teaching this class since 2017, and it evolved because because of me doing my online radio show at the time, people had so many questions for me. Okay. Yeah. If you just scroll down, you'll see the information there for the show. I mean, for the class, if you scroll down, people had so many questions, and they were asking me I was already doing lectures. They were asking me to teach classes. So we take you throughout history. We look at some ancient African societies, Kemet, Nubia, Ta-Nehisi, Ethiopia, things of this nature. And we try to go through history chronologically. And you keep going down because it shows the flyer and gives more information. It shows my class lesson plan. So we have classes May 11th, May 18th, May 25th, and June 1st. Okay. We do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. You can go back and watch this anytime. So even after the class is over with, you'll still have full access. There are about 200 slides in the class. I put together the PowerPoint presentation. There are 80 to 100 articles that we look at as well. Okay. And there are video clips that we look at in excerpts of interviews I've done with some of our scholars, Professor James Small, Runoko Rashidi, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, Tony Browder, Professor Kaba Kamene. So we look at some excerpts of interviews that I've done with them also. This content, and if you scroll down below the picture, below the flyer, shows my lesson plan. The content is PG-13. The content is PG-13. So you can use this content with your teenagers, with your youth. It's not overly graphic. I don't do a lot of cursing, anything like that in the class. Okay. And we also deal with what the Moors introduced into Europe and how all of this gets twisted around when the Moors go in and educate these Europeans, because everything basically we taught Europeans came back to kick us in the behind. Okay. And we're going to see how this leads to the transatlantic slave trade. And this really puts us on a trajectory to where we are today. When you talk about the Central American countries, when you talk about the Caribbean countries, things like this, a lot of those are going to be conquered by Christopher Columbus on his 4 voyages. When we talk about Haiti and what's going on in Haiti today, that was the island of Hispaniola. In the western third of the island of Hispaniola is where Haiti is. And then that's going to be conquered by the Spanish about 1492. But the French take over the western third of the island of Hispaniola in 1697. Okay. And it becomes a French colony. And then we know you have the Haitian Revolution beginning in 1791. So we start seeing how all this history is connected. And we can see all this going back to Christopher Columbus, European exploration, Europeans coming out of the Dark Ages. All right. So, and your understanding of politics is directly related to your understanding of history. They're both interconnected, interrelated. So visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, register for the class today, and we'll see you in class today and the subsequent weeks.
All right. Well, my brother, you laid it out for us today.
Oh, yeah. Oh, thank you. Thank you
Being here. And I don't know, I'm ecstatic. I and Lynn as well, we always talk about the importance of history and knowing who we are, because you gain your power from self-knowledge, and
Yes.
they've done everything that they could to take our knowledge of ourselves away from us and prevent us from being effective in obtaining freedom. The freedom starts here. So this is where the battle is taking place right now. It's a battle for our mind space. What we have to do is arm ourselves with knowledge, and from that we will derive the wisdom that it takes to be successful in life. Thank you for joining us on 360 Info Network.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll look forward to our conversation next Saturday.
All right. Thank you, brothers.
Hotel.
Peace.
All right. And as always, know yourself, love yourself, and be yourself. Make today your absolute best day. Peace, everyone.
Peace. All right, brother. I got yes.